I still remember the day Eden stepped into Vesuva. My brother and I were preparing for a fishing trip, our first one in a few months. It was pretty uncommon for people to fish around Vesuva, because it was way more popular in Vorpal. Considering Vesuva was a place most people would gather, it was often just a stop on the way to another continent, or on the way to Vorpal itself. My brother and I liked that most people went to Vorpal instead. It meant more fish for us. The day before our trip, we noticed some rats had gotten into the closet where we stored our nets and chewed through them, so I made my way to one of the local weavers to see if they could help us. We always preferred catching them with nets instead of rods, but if we had to use the rods, we would. At least there was a backup. Luckily for us, the weaver was able to help. I left him the information of what we needed and some coins, and he told me to return in the morning before we set sail. I recall stepping out of his shop and literally letting out a sigh of relief. I felt pretty dumb, because let's be real, who does that? I'm just a simple Fennin man, so I guess something like this would lift a bit of a burden off my shoulders. But letting out an actual sigh of relief over something like this sounds like some dramatic emphasis you would hear about in a story. My time thinking about how stupid I was brief, as a woman walked right into me. The corner of the weaver's shop was a bit tight, so I don't think it was her fault.
I'm sorry. I'm in a bit of a rush.
I stepped aside and told her it wasn't a problem. It was hard to tell the age of the woman. She was short with very light blonde hair, blue eyes, and wore a thick, solid bracelet on each wrist. One was white and one was red, a color scheme that matched the dress she was wearing. People come and go all day, every day, in Vesuva, but despite the ships that dock and depart on a daily basis, it's pretty rare to see someone in that much of a rush. It must have been a matter of life or death. Apparently bracelets weren't the only fashionable accessory the woman wore. I noticed a hairpin on the ground that must have shook loose when she bumped into me. I picked it up off the ground and turned to look for her, but she wasn't even in my sights anymore. Though I live a pretty normal life, I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to artifacts and fashions of different locations on Fenrir. I recognized the symbol of the hairpin, a flower they called the Fey Dandelion. It was a symbol most commonly used in the town of Asgard. I slowly made my way back to my home, excited to share the news with my brother that we'll be able to use nets on our trip, and keeping an eye out for the woman so I could return the hairpin. You can imagine the look on my face as I heard some commotion in one of the nearby buildings. I peered through a window that was eye level with me and saw the same woman leaning over a bed and casting healing magic. It really was a matter of life or death. I patiently waited as she healed a man laying in the bed. The man's family gathered around as if this could be his final moments. A few minutes passed, and the woman backed away slowly. The man sat up in his bed. His family was amazed, as was I. They smiled and cried. They hugged each other, and they gave thanks to the woman for saving his life. I clenched the hairpin tightly in my hand, as I brought a finger up to remove a tear escaping down my cheek. "You're her," I said when she walked out of the house. "Eden, the healer of Asgard." She blushed at my words and nodded. I explained that she dropped her hairpin and she thanked me for bringing it to her. Strangely enough, she asked which way I was going, and I pointed in the direction of my house. She started walking that way and I followed her. We talked the entire way back to my home. I did have a lot of questions. Tales of Eden's journey across Fenrir reached far and wide, and I couldn't believe she was walking beside me. I asked her many questions about her stops along the way to Vesuva. I wanted to know what it was like to heal people and save lives. The walk back to my house felt way too short, and I wanted to ask her more. Instead, when we got to my house, she began asking questions about me. We sat on the stairs in front of my home for hours, just talking. She was almost as interested in my boring everyday life as I was in her exciting, fulfilling, and miraculous one. Our house was close to one of the docks, and I couldn't help but notice her stare out every time a ship passed by. "Are you thinking about leaving?" I asked. "Is this the final stop on your journey?" It wouldn't be surprising if it wasn't the final stop, but rather time for her to go see if the other continents needed her magic.
I think about leaving Fenrir a lot. Go to Isla or Sevilla, somewhere where no one knows me and I can start over.
She looked down and played with one of her bracelets.
I talk myself out of it every time, because I know people need me here. But now that I'm in Vesuva and there are all these ships coming in and out of the port, it's the most tempting it's ever been.
Then why not spend some time here instead, I recommended.
Stay in Vesuva?
She looked up at me as she questioned it. Why not? You don't need to go from town to town to look for people to heal. There are a lot of people right here in Vesuva that need patching up all the time. That guy whose life you saved, there are people coming in from the other continents sick all the time. I pleaded my case as best I could. It probably sounded a bit selfish, but the idea of having Eden in Vesuva for a while sounded like it would be nice. She had this calming aura about her that just made you feel safe and at peace. It was hard to tell if I got through to her, but the way our conversation was going made her feel some type of way as she put her hand on my knee and thanked me for returning her hairpin. She also thanked me for the conversation. I tried to play it cool. The pleasure was mine, I said, accompanied by a goofy smile. Eden blushed again and walked off. I didn't think I would ever see her again. My brother and I went on our fishing trip. We were out on the Fen Seas for roughly 2 days and came back with a pretty impressive haul of fish, if I do say so myself. When we docked and I got off the boat, I saw a woman looking out to sea on the dock across from ours. It was Eden. I did not expect to see you still here in Vesuva, I said. Something keeping you here? She kept looking off into the distance, the vast Fen Seas in front of her.
I used to think my journey on the main continent would end here. That I would get on one of these boats, never look back, and start a more normal life.
And now?
Now I think my journey ended the moment I stepped in Vesuva. And a new, way more important one has just begun.